Jack Willows was born in the city of Handwritten, east of New Yorling of New Eingalde. The city is known for its lack of wealth and poor conditions, leaving many of the folk that live there in poverty. The lands and property there are all in poor conditions and not quite suitable for living. However, many still flock to the city due to its low costs in realty and lack of demands on one's budget for those looking to living in a city setting. The population there is primarily of Akinine kin, who have been living there for generations. Most of the elder folk there don't seem to mind the state of their homeland and have found ways to make a living in one of the poorest places in Ain. They make their living as farmers, merchants, and carpenters. The youngsters who become of age to leave out on their own become pilgrims or traveling merchants. Despite there being no lack of carpenters in Handwritten, the buildings and even the houses are all in shambles. This fact leaves even the kinfolk that live there baffled over their living conditions. No matter how hard they work on their architecture, their efforts seem to go in vain, causing the buildings and houses to crumble and age in a considerable amount of time. The elder folk pin it on a curse that has been put onto the entirety of the city. They say that the curse looms over the city as a result of an individual who once worshipped the Fallen One and went back on his word to this god, spurring the vengeful god who then placed a curse on the one that scorned him, as well as his entire lineage and where he was born, that being Handwritten. As a result, the entire city, as well as the kin that live there, have to suffer with the ever-aging and decaying of their homes. But many have come to call the city of Ruin as their home, and still refuse to leave. Jack's parents worked hard to make a living and give him the best raising they could afford. His father was a blacksmith, smithing the finest armor and weaponry for the city's official law enforcements. His best work were guns that he was widely known for. Even those not of the city would come to their town just for the gunsmithing alone. This helped put Handwritten on the map as not just an old-looking city, but a place of value. Mrs. Willows was a tailor, helping with the townsfolk's upkeep in their attire. She was very skillful in her creations and had an eye for fashion. Before, many of the folk there wore clothing that were dark and dreary to the eye. They'd still sport the holes worn by their previous siblings that would hand the clothing down to the next in line. With Willow's sense of beauty and aspiration, she brought colour and life to the once shabby fabric of her town, which would soon branch further throughout the city. Although Jack's parents were very skilled in their work, they would not take credit for their work and would instead teach others their trade so that they could help their fellow kinsfolk. Till this day, the Willows' work can be found not only in Handwritten's busiest town, but in New Yorling as well. Having both successful parents while living in one of the world's poorest cities gave Jack the freedom to become whatever he wanted. His parents were devout to their raising of him, but they did believe that the young should have their freedom. So Jack was to become whatever he wanted. That meant that he would not have to follow in his parents' footsteps and choose the trade they chose, but rather something completely different. The only problem was that Jack had no idea what he wanted to do for a profession. He would learn the insides and out of carpentry with his father, but that did not seem to interest Jack at all, who would then turn to his mother for aid. She tried to teach him tailoring and even showed him how to make his outsuit. Jack seemed to hearken towards tailoring as his trade of preference, but as he grew older, his interest fell from tailoring and into the laps of females. Jack would spend most of his early teen years courting and flirting with the town girls and seemed to have a natural knack for it. He would work his charms on the one he had eyes for, wooing them with presents like chocolates and stuffed animals. He was so good at what he did that he would successfully become the male dominant of his own harem at the young age of 15. A group of females of different species, all dedicated and in love with him. It wouldn't bother the locals until Jack's knack for tempting the opposite sex with his looks and swagger began to also work on older females well over his age. This included the husbands of the females of his town, who then started to pay close attention to Jack's dealings and did not like what they saw. But instead of taking their ire out on Jack, they would blame the wives at fault to be indecent and disloyal to their wedding vows. These accusations were not entirely unwarranted, but when the husbands began to accuse their adulterous wives of being corrupted and worshippers of Malakath, things took a turn for the worse. Any and all females that had anything to do with Jack began to be targeted as Malakath worshippers and put on trial, where they would have to defend their lives with the truth or be put to death. Even the group of lovers Jack once held was scrutinized for being in love with him, even if they were around the same age as him. Any females seen with him and associated with him were to be put into question, and if they were found to be liars, they were sentenced to death. The Womkin and young girls were put on trials in front of the entire town and had their self-worth put to question. They were pressed with questions against their morals and sense of Womkinhood. They had their faith in the gods put in the light, as well as their behavior. They were seen as harlots and filthy whores, those who had turned their backs on the divine gods and deserved no respect, not even from their own families, who were all distraught from it all. The females pleaded their innocence to the kin of their town, but because the majority happened to be of a male jury, they were all found guilty without proper cause and sentenced to hang. Fearing for his life, Jack's parents advised that he flee the town and never return. That meant that he would never be seeing his beloved parents again, but it was for his own safety. Without the means for packing his things, Jack would leave that very day after the hanging of his lovers and fled to the major city that was New Yorling. There, he would lay low as a hermit, never leaving his house or interacting with others. He never socialized and would only leave his house to buy food and supplies he could afford, with the money he'd use working as a shoemaker. He first started as a shoeshine boy, then would gradually learn how to make leather shoes from the shop owner he worked for. For years into his early 20s, Jack worked as a shoemaker, creating fine leather shoes and soles. He would even replace the worn soles of those looking for shoe repair. Jack seemed to like his new life, living simply in the big city of New Yorling. But it wouldn't be long before fate would catch up to him. While Jack was tending to the shoe shop, he met a young lady who came in looking for a custom-made pair of shoes. He was immediately stricken by her beauty, and she seemed to return his wanting gaze. The two would soon fall in love with each other and began courting one another. Jack would begin to venture out of his home and into civilization once more. He and his new lover would go out dancing and fine dining that Jack could afford with his bustling business as the locals' fine shoemaker. Like in his adolescence years, Jack would spoil his lady with gifts. However, he seemed to really be smitten by this lady, for he found himself also wanting to shower her with adoration, often wanting to see her. Sometimes he'd go nights without sleep, just thinking about her, and the gifts he would bring her were not the usual of chocolates and stuffed animals he bought for his past flings, but things she could wear, such as fine clothing of the Elkai silk and jewelry. He loved bringing her presents, and loved it even more that she could show it off to others whenever they would go out to dinner parties. It made him feel like a real min when she would smile at him with the shine of her newly bought jewelry and hug him tightly just before coitus, which was something Jack had never engaged in before. It was not common for those to perform sexual acts with their partner before marriage. But this seemed like a good time for the both of them, who were madly in love with each other, so Jack thought. One day, while Jack was out on the town with his lady, he was confronted by a large and angry Toro who claimed that the Womkin around his arm happened to be his wife. Horrified, Jack looked to his supposed lady, who confessed it all to be true. The Toro warned Jack against seeing his wife, that if he ever caught him with his wife again, that he would kill him. Jack was left with that stern warning, along with a broken heart. He vowed to never to see the Womkin again, but the connection he felt for the Womkin would not let him rest days after. One day, while he lay in bed thinking over his lady, he heard noise coming from the window. He lived on the second floor of a house that he shared with a family living below him, so the noise from his window caused some alarm in him. Was he being burglarized? Was the Toro coming to end his life early? Jack reached for something inside of the drawer of his nightstand. It was a pistol that his father gave to him before he left his hometown. It would be enough. Jack threw off the sheets of his bed and crept over to the window. He could still hear rustling and some mild grunting of whomever was climbing to his window. Reading his pistol and steeling himself, Jack stood in front of the window and aimed. The grunting and rustling got louder as whomever was coming for him neared his window. Jack placed his finger on the trigger and waited. Upon seeing his lady's flushed face, he lost all initials to shoot and quickly moved to the window. She was exhausted from the climb up his house. Jack asked her how she got up in the first place, to which she explained that she used the wall vines that crept along his face of his house. They were thick and strong enough to be scaled. Amused and bemused, Jack pulled in his lady and hugged her before the realization upon her being there hit him. He frantically asked her why she would come to see him despite her being married and to a dangerous Toro, nonetheless. His lady would explain that their connection was stronger than her Toro, who happened to be abusive towards her, which led her into the arms of another in the first place. Jack was just thrilled that he was the one she wanted. So much so that he'd forgotten the danger he'd be putting he and his lady in. That morning, after their lovemaking, Jack woke up to the harsh and loud banging of someone at the door of his living space. There was a thunderous shouting before the door was torn clean off its hinges, and there stood a heaving mad Toro. He huffed hard through his flaring nares and stared directly at Jack. There was an axe held in his large hand, low at his legs and poised to be used. Jack's lover did say that her husband was a lumberjack, and a good one at that. He reckoned that he could use that axe to cut through anything. Just the sight of the axe alone should have had Jack sprawling for the window, but he was frozen with fear, which was all the Toro needed to storm over to the bed where they lay and send down the axe on Jack's neck. Jack was beheaded before he even realized what was going to happen to him. The only thing he saw was the raising of the axe before it was sent down on him then. Nothing.